My parents chose their favorite daughter to inherit it all, but my grandparents had a secret that changed everything. From the very beginning, I felt like I was always in the shadow of my younger sister, Amy. Growing up, it wasn't just a matter of being overlooked, it was as though I didn't even exist in the same space as she did. While Amy, at only 2 years old, received extravagant birthday parties, complete with a petting zoo and professional face painters, I had to settle for a store-bought cake and a quiet family dinner. The disparity between us wasn't just about material things, it was emotional too. It was like I was invisible in my own home. My parents never attended my school events, never showed up for my big moments, and didn't even acknowledge the hours I spent practicing for a play that they missed, arriving only to console Amy after she had a stomachache. I remember standing on stage, feeling the sting of rejection as they sat there with her. For all my hard work and accomplishments, like winning science fairs or achieving straight A's, my efforts were met with silence, while Amy, with her mediocre grades, was showered with praise and gifts. It wasn't just the little things that hurt, it was the deep, unspoken message that, no matter what I did, I would never be enough. The emotional neglect took a toll on me, but I learned to carry it in silence. Every time Amy was celebrated, a part of me crumbled, but I didn't dare voice my hurt. It wasn't worth it. I convinced myself that this was just how things were, that I should be grateful for the bare minimum. But even as I grew older, that feeling of being unseen never faded. As we got older, the favoritism only intensified, and I began to feel like a mere ghost in my own family. While Amy breezed through life with little effort, I worked tirelessly to make something of myself, yet it seemed like nothing I did could earn me a moment of their attention. When I won awards, like first place in a regional science fair or earned straight A's, my parents barely acknowledged it. But when Amy barely scraped by with a B+, they threw her a celebration dinner and bought her a new phone. I remember the sting of that comparison like it was yesterday, the hollow feeling of knowing that no matter how much I excelled, it would never be enough to make them proud. I was driven by the hope that if I kept achieving, they would see me, they would love me the way they loved Amy. But it was always the same. Their eyes were fixed on her, their words of encouragement were for her, and their pride was in her. The hardest part came during high school. I was chosen as one of the 2 applicants for a prestigious summer program at Harvard, a recognition I had worked years for. When I shared the news at dinner, my father grumbled, barely acknowledging my achievement before shifting the conversation to Amy's upcoming dance recital. My mother's remark was even more crushing. "That's nice," she said, and then moved on, as if it were no big deal. In that moment, I realized that my entire life had been spent seeking validation from people who would never truly see me. The tears I had held back for years finally began to surface, but even then, I swallowed them down. I had become so accustomed to being invisible that I no longer knew how to fight for my place. The years of emotional neglect started to eat away at me, and by the time I reached my 20s, I was no longer the confident person I once was. Instead, I was consumed by anxiety and a constant feeling of inadequacy, always doubting myself and never feeling good enough. It wasn't just the lack of support from my parents, it was the suffocating weight of trying to earn their approval, only to have it slip further out of reach. I sought therapy to help me navigate the overwhelming pressure, but it wasn't easy. The realization that my parents' behavior wasn't my fault didn't come overnight. It was a painful and long journey, one filled with heartache as I had to relearn how to validate myself. It felt like I was walking through a fog, never quite sure of who I was or where I fit in this family that had always made me feel like a stranger. The worst part was knowing that no matter how hard I tried, I would always be second place to Amy. It crushed me inside to see how easily she breezed through life, still being coddled by our parents. I had built a life for myself, a decent job in finance, my own home, but it never felt like enough. The truth was, I was broken, and no amount of success could fill the void my parents had created. The scars ran deep, and for the longest time, I didn't know how to heal. I felt trapped in a cycle of trying and failing, constant battle to break free from the toxic hold my family had over me. The day I received the inheritance from my grandfather, I thought my life might finally take a turn for the better. I had worked so hard to build myself up, despite the years of emotional neglect from my parents. The $500,000 from my grandfather's estate was a dream, something that could help me pay off my education loans, set me up for a future, and maybe even help me build something of my own. But when I shared the news with my parents, the shock on their faces wasn't one of pride or happiness, it was something much darker. They were angry. My father, with his usual authority, pulled me aside and said that it wasn't fair for me to receive an equal portion of the inheritance. Amy, who still lived in their basement, was struggling, he argued. She needed it more than I did. My chest tightened as I tried to explain that this was Grandpa's decision, not theirs, but they wouldn't listen. The guilt-tripping started immediate reminders of all the sacrifices they had made for me, the small things they had done. Yet, they conveniently ignored the countless gifts, shopping sprees, and privileges they had lavished on Amy. My father, acting as the executor of the will, became more forceful, telling me that I should act morally and give my portion to Amy. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The betrayal was beyond anything I had ever imagined. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the years of emotional abandonment coming back to haunt me. They were willing to take what was rightfully mine, just to keep the cycle of favoritism alive. It was a slap in the face, a painful reminder that no matter what I did, I would always be secondary in their eyes. As the tension built, I stood my ground, but the storm that followed would leave a mark on the family forever. Things quickly escalated when my father, furious with my refusal, took matters into his own hands. As the executor of the will, he decided to reinterpret Grandpa's intentions, convincing himself that it was only right for Amy to have my share. The fury in his eyes, as he told me this, felt like a knife to my heart. I tried to reason with him, but his anger drowned out any attempt at calm discussion. He called me ungrateful, selfish, and said that I owed it to Amy, to our family, to give up what was rightfully mine. The words stung, each one a reminder of the years I had spent fighting for validation from people who had never truly seen me. I couldn't understand how they could betray Grandpa's wishes like this. I brought up the times he had supported me, the way he had always treated us equally, but my father dismissed it as mere misinterpretation. My mother, as usual, stood by him, adding fuel to the fire, accusing me of disrespecting the family. The pressure mounted, and I could feel my resolve beginning to crack, but I refused to give in. The more they pushed, the more I realized that standing up for myself was the only way I could break free from the toxic grip they had on me. In the midst of the chaos, I turned to the only person who had always seen the truth, me grandmother. The bond we shared had always been special, and I knew she would understand the depth of the situation. When I confided in her, her reaction was one I hadn't expected. She was furious. She immediately called my parents' attempt to alter the will outrageous and disrespectful, and made it clear that Grandpa had always been adamant about treating his grandchildren equally. She told me about a conversation she'd had with him years ago, where he had spoken with pride about how he had made sure to include everyone in his will equally. The truth was devastating, yet liberating at the same time. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in this fight. Grandma revealed that my parents had previously asked Grandpa to leave everything to Amy, and he had refused, fearing it would create a divide. To make matters worse, Grandpa had even included a clause in his will that anyone attempting to challenge the inheritance would lose their portion. Armed with this revelation, I confronted my parents, and I could see the guilt flickering in their eyes, but they still tried to justify their actions. My mother even accused me of dishonoring Grandpa's memory by challenging their decision. It was the final straw. I couldn't back down. This wasn't just about money. It was about the years of manipulation and neglect. I had to stand up for what was mine, for what Grandpa had wanted. The family split in two, and I knew there was no going back. The moment I confronted my parents with the truth, everything unraveled. The family was thrown into chaos, and the rift that had been brewing for years was now exposed for everyone to see. My mother, who had always shielded Amy, was stunned by the audacity of my challenge. She broke down, sobbing, accusing me of tearing the family apart. "How could you do this to us?" she cried, her voice full of pain, but it was the same pain I had felt for years. I had endured the hurt of being second best, of being dismissed in favor of Amy, and now they wanted me to give up my inheritance to continue that cycle. My father, who had always been the figure of authority, turned cold. His face twisted with a mixture of anger and betrayal as he lashed out, demanding that I yield to Amy's needs. "You're selfish," he spat, and the words felt like a slap. His control over me, over the family, was unraveling, and he couldn't stand it. But what struck me the most was the way Amy stood there, silent. I had hoped she might speak up, but all she did was shrug, as if she'd been conditioned to accept their demands. That silence felt like a betrayal in itself. The more I resisted, the more they pushed, calling me ungrateful, accusing me of abandoning my family. The guilt trips piled on, and yet I stood firm, knowing I could not give in any longer. As the fight escalated, I realized that this inheritance wasn't just a financial gift, it was my chance to finally break free from the toxic grip my parents had on me. But as I held my ground, the damage to the family was irreversible. I had already lost them. As the weeks passed, the weight of the family's rejection started to settle in, but so did a strange sense of empowerment. Amy and I hadn't spoken much after the confrontation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she, too, was caught in the web of our parents' favoritism. Then, one day, she reached out to me. It wasn't the apology I had been waiting for, but it was a start. She confessed, quietly, that she felt guilty for not standing up for me earlier. "I've been blind," she said, her voice cracking, and I could hear the guilt in every word. That moment, that raw honesty between us, felt like a turning point. We began to talk more, and slowly, the years of tension started to melt away. Amy admitted that being the golden child wasn't all it seemed. She had never learned how to stand on her own, always depending on our parents to smooth things over for her. She confessed how it had weighed on her, how she had longed for the independence I had forged for myself. For the first time, I saw her as more than just the favored sibling. I saw her as a person, trapped in the same suffocating cycle I had been. Together, we began to rebuild what our parents had broken. We started having coffee dates, sharing our lives without the weight of expectation. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was no longer alone.